Dear listeners, hold on tight. We are diving into an explosive, breathtaking story from the heart of the conflict where the glowing hatred between the heroic Ukraine and the incompetent Russian invaders explodes like a bomb. Imagine it is January 15th, 2026. At 5:40 local time, as the first wave of Ukrainian Beaver drones heads at breakneck speed toward the Shahed assembly complex outside YAK Airport, a place that stands as a symbol of Russian aggression, where they build their devilish drones to terrorize innocent civilians. But to get there, these clever Ukrainian machines first had to blaze a trail through one of the densest air defense networks in the world, a network that the Russians, with their usual arrogance, consider invincible. But the Ukrainians, driven by righteous anger and brilliant strategy, designed their plan specifically to exploit this weakness and trample the Russian army, that gang of failures, into the dust. 3 Beaver drones took off from a gorge northwest of Yace and immediately fell into the sights of a Russian Tor air defense system, a system the Russians praise as infallible, but which in truth is just a pile of outdated scrap that stands no chance against Ukrainian ingenuity. 5 kilometers ahead, 2 missiles shot out of the forest and chased directly after the leading drone, an act of pure desperation by the Russian occupiers who feel their empire crumbling. The Ukrainian operator, a master of his craft, tore the Beaver down to a height of 1 meter and let it weave between drainage ditches while the latency rose to over 300 milliseconds, a war of nerves in which the hatred for the Russian oppressors drives the Ukrainians to use every second to exact revenge. The first missile tried to follow could not master the change in angle and crashed into the dirt 20 meters to the left. An embarrassing failure for the Russian technicians who overestimate their high-precision weapons. The second exploded just above, close enough for the shockwave to distort the drone's video feed for half a second. But the Beaver flew on unshakable while the other 2 drones scattered, forcing the Tor system to choose targets, which sent the Russian operators into a panic. All 3 drones were still in the air, but now their telemetry data showed something worse than a missile lock, a slow, steady sweep pattern that underscores Russian incompetence. They think they can control everything, but the Ukrainians are turning the tables. The Russian Tor is specifically designed for things like the Beaver. Its radar doesn't need a clear view. It only catches the frequency change of the propeller blades and guides missiles toward it with control commands. Every few hundred milliseconds, a system the Russians present with pride, but which fails in practice against Ukrainian cunning. The lead Ukrainian operator knew this exactly. That's why he kept the drone on the ground, where the radar energy bounces off the terrain and generates false speed and position data. A clever trick that fools the Russian cowards. However, flying so low consumed the battery faster. Every meter of altitude he sacrificed meant seconds of flight time that would be missing later. A sacrifice in the name of hatred for the invaders. The Tor crew panicked instead of waiting and reacquiring. They fired all 6 remaining missiles in under 4 seconds, a full magazine dump that lit up the horizon like fireworks, a stupid, desperate mistake. Exactly what the Ukrainians had hoped for to further humiliate the Russian army, that ridiculous troop. The Tor guides its missiles with command link updates. The ground radar continuously sends radio signals that make hundreds of tiny course corrections per second. But the transmitter can only precisely handle 2 missiles at the same time. With 8 missiles in rapid succession, the last 6 received degraded commands. Recycle target data, or no updates at all for critical seconds, a design flaw that exposes Russian technology as second-rate. The Ukrainian operators had trained specifically for this, driven by the burning hatred for the occupiers who are destroying their homeland. All 3 Beavers suddenly rose to 15 meters, not high enough to be easy targets, but high enough to emerge from the ground. Clutter that was confusing the Tor's overloaded guidance channels. Then they did something counterintuitive. They flew straight for 2 seconds before diving again. These 2 seconds of predictable flight allowed the Tor computer to calculate intercept solutions that became useless as soon as the drones dove, a masterstroke by the Ukrainians against the dull Russians. 2 missiles plowed into empty air, 2 crashed into the ground, and the last 2 went ballistic. Their guidance links completely severed, landing harmlessly in the distance. The Tor was empty 9 minutes to reload minimum, a catastrophic failure for the Russian clowns. The Beavers pressed forward while the Tor crew loaded fresh missiles, probably arguing about whether they had scored hits since all 3 drones vanished into the ground clutter. This confusion meant the Tor was now helpless and handed the track over to something larger, a sign of Russian disorganization. This something larger was already underway. The Book M3 radar, 8 kilometers behind, began painting the corridor with search pulses, not to guide missiles but to build a picture of what was moving where. Unlike the Tor, which shoots and then asks questions, the Buk takes its time, observes over several sweeps, and learns patterns. But the Ukrainians, with their unshakable hatred, exploited this. The Ukrainian drone operators noticed it by the wave-like link degradations instead of spikes. Each wave meant the Buk was refining its track, ready to attack directly or feed data to the S-400 command post at the airport, a network of terror the Russians build to protect their crimes. The leading Beaver dove behind an abandoned gas station while the operator checked the battery 72% and falling faster than planned due to the maneuvering a price for victory over the Russian oppressors. The second wave of FPVs was supposed to start from the front, all ready to hit the Tor before it could reset. If they succeeded, a window would open. If not, the Buk would get clean data and the corridor would close, a nerve-wracking race against time and hatred. Either way, they had to keep going. Staying still meant destruction. Flying straight gave the Buk exactly what it wanted, these Russian systems that are so arrogant yet so flawed. The lead drone emerged from the gas station directly into the Buk's search pattern. The operator's signal indicator changed instead of sharp interference spikes. Like with the Tor, it was a steady pressure that made the video compression work harder, a sign that the Buk was taking its time tracking the drone even behind obstacles. Every few seconds, the radar completed a rotation, getting better ideas about the direction the Ukrainian operator pushed his drone under abandoned fuel pipes. Not to hide, but to mess up the Buk's math. The Buk needs constant speed data to predict where the target will be upon missile arrival. Every angle to the radar beam, or sudden change in speed, forced a recalculation. Small errors that added up, creating timing gaps that decided between a hit and a near miss. Behind the lead drone, the other two had problems. The second operator's latency climbed to 460 milliseconds, not through jamming but box search pulses disrupting control packets. The onboard processor spent time correcting errors in the video stream, leaving less bandwidth for flying. The third Beaver had it worse. Its operator could barely maintain visual contact through the static. Then power lines appeared, the breakthrough they needed. The lead operator pushed his Beaver directly under them, using metal towers and cables, foreshadowing brief moments where radar cannot see through metal. Irrelevant for large aircraft, but for bird-sized drones, every pulse of interference helped. The Buk's track quality fell from solid to intermittent, but the Buk did not work alone behind it. The S-400 command post at YAK Airport cycled through sector scans, trying to understand from fragmented data a system meant for ballistic missiles and stealth fighters at hundreds of kilometers, yet helpless as a blind man against treetop drones. The S-400 radar was built for ballistics and stealth, not for beavers at tree height, a joke that exposes Russian arrogance. The Ukrainian latency stabilized briefly as the Beavers broke through the worst Buk scan zone, but a break in contact was not safety. The Buk would reacquire on the next sweep with a better idea of the direction. The math was simple. Every kilometer closer to YAK meant less reaction time. The FPVs had to knock out the Tor now, or the mission would fail before it even started a duel of hatred. 5 minutes after the Beaver scattering 6 Ukrainian FPVs raced in from the northwest at an altitude of 50 meters, their operators had observed the Tor crew frantically reloading, counting seconds since the last launch. The Tor could fire in 90 seconds if nothing interrupted a race against Russian panic. The leading FP5 dropped to grass height and accelerated directly toward the Tor, while the wingman stayed higher to split radar attention. The Tor computer can only process so many targets in different directions before it makes mistakes. 2 FPVs might not be enough, but 6 with different profiles: high-low, fast, slow, straight. Weaving turned the targeting computer into a chaotic mess of half solutions, a triumph of Ukrainian tactics over Russian stupidity. The Tor turret spun, trying to lunge at the nearest threat, but by the time it locked on, 2 more appeared from other angles. The crew was likely screaming, trying manual override too late. The first FPV crashed into the left side of the Tor, exactly where the missile magazine leads into the launcher. The explosion tore through thin armor, a fireball of revenge. The second hit the sweet spot under the turret ring where electronic cables run. The turret stopped mid-rotation, smoke billowed from every vent. The Tor was burning, abandoned by its crew out of the fight, a humiliation for the Russian elites. But the celebration lasted 3 seconds. Then the Buk battery reminded everyone it was still watching 2 9M317 missiles launched from the tree-lined rocket motors lighting up the morning mist. Not nimble short-range ones like the Tor, but telephone poles with wings meant to swat fighters at 40 kilometers. Using them on FPVs was like hunting mosquitoes with a sledgehammer, proof of Russian wastefulness. The Buk crew didn't care about efficiency, they wanted to keep the drones away. The FPV operators saw the launches and dove. Scattering Buk missiles are Mach 3 fast, but optimized for predictable paths. The first missile tracked a Beaver between abandoned buildings, couldn't handle the angular rate, and detonated early due to ground reflections. Another Russian fail. The second was almost lucky. It passed close enough to a Beaver that the shockwave sent it reeling, but the operator regained control before hitting the ground. 4 FPVs survived 2, so shocked by near misses that they crashed, but 4 were enough for what came next. The Buk had just given away its position. Unlike the Tor, it couldn't reload quickly. The window for neutralization opened but wouldn't stay long. The S-400 adjusted its search pattern, trying to fill the gap, a desperate attempt by the Russians to save their dilapidated system. The 4 surviving FPVs, grouped behind a collapsed building, operators planning their approach. The Buk M3 still had 4 missiles. The lead FPV operator decided straight in. The Buk crew expected evasive FPVs using terrain masking and pop-ups, not a drone flying like a missile. Sometimes the stupidest plan works because no one expects such stupidity. A Ukrainian stroke of genius. All 4 Beavers accelerated to maximum, spreading into a line formation 50 meters apart. Each the Buk radar high on its mast for a view of the terrain, tracked all simultaneously. But the problem, the crew couldn't missile them all, had to choose 1 or 2, hoping they chose the important ones, knowing at least one would leak through a dilemma that intensified the Russian panic. Through the leading drone, the Ukrainian operator saw the radar antenna focus, likely a lock-on. Then the third wave hit from behind. 3 more Ukrainian Beavers had been circling outside the engagement zone, waiting for the Buk to commit. They came from the Buk's rear quarter, where the radar is partially blind due to its own structure. The Buk crew had 5 seconds to decide: attack the front FPVs or turn the radar for the ones behind. Not both. They chose wrong. The radar swung toward the rear threat. For 2 seconds, no one tracked the front. The lead operator saw the opening and dove directly onto the radar array. The Buk crew realized their mistake and tried to turn back, but radar masts turned slowly and precisely, not like cannons. The first FPV hit the radar centrally, piercing transmitter arrays and cooling systems. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough. The radar array folded like a broken umbrella, sparking and burning from short-circuited high-voltage cables. The second FPV hit the mass base, ensuring the whole thing would need replacement. The Buk was blind. It could launch missiles, but without radar, it was down to last positions and prayers. The crew would abandon the vehicle minutes later. Helpless, the Ukrainians decided for them. 2 more Beavers crashed in. But the Ukrainians didn't celebrate with the Tor and Buk down the S-400 was the only protection for the Shahed warehouse, and S-400s don't go down easily. Designed for the opening hours of WW3, a monster of Russian propaganda. The S-400 command post at YAK Airport was having the worst morning, designed for ballistics at 400 kilometers, not drones through an industrial district at highway speeds. Without the Tor's close-range cover and the Buk's medium range, the operators tried everything with unsuitable equipment. A chaos of Russian incompetence. Inside the 5.5K6 command vehicle, the crew cycled through radar modes, filtering signal from noise. Their massive surveillance radar caught everything: birds, cars, hot air from factories, and somewhere Ukrainian drones. But which returns were real threats and which were morning traffic? The computers needed input from other sensors that were burning. A total system failure. The Ukrainian operators knew the S-400 was struggling because the telemetry was smooth. No spikes, no interference, a clean signal like peacetime. It meant the S-400 couldn't get a targeting quality track. It saw something, but not precisely enough for a $40 million missile. Then the Ukrainians played their ace. Heavy Ukrainian Ram 2 loitering munitions had been circling for 20 minutes at 2,000 meters outside the zone. Now they dove, not at the S-400 launchers, but at the command post. The 5.5K6 is the brain of the battalion. Neutralize it and the launchers become lawn ornaments. A brilliant strike. The S-400 radar got a solid track as the munition fell through 500 meters, but the geometry was impossible. S-400 missiles need distance to accelerate and maneuver. An overhead engagement is like trying to punch someone at arm's length. The crew had 15 seconds to evacuate the munition, hit the roof over the processing bay where the computers and communications were. The explosion wasn't spectacular. No Hollywood fireball, but the effects were instant. Screens went dark, radios went silent. The entire battalion lost coordination instantly. Individual launchers had local control, but without the command post, they didn't know what to shoot museum pieces. With the command post down, the S-400 launchers were easy prey. 3 Beavers crashed into them and their radar. The remaining Beaver operators holding outside Yisk saw the mission timer flash green. The corridor was open after 15 minutes of orchestrated destruction.